Hello everyone and welcome to episode 4 of the AIR Exchange. I am your host, Bruce Larange, and I'm pleased to have with us today our distinguished guest, Dr. John McKeon, who, amongst other professional pursuits, which we will cover shortly, is the CEO of Allergy Standards Limited, an international standards and certification body, and a company which he founded while working as an emergency room doctor. Dr. McKeon, thank you for joining, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Bruce, on this really important issue around healthy buildings and indoor air quality, and really looking forward to our conversation.
Well, me as well, and I think it would be an understatement to say that you have a busy calendar, so thank you for making time to be here with our audience as well.
Thank you.
So, John, I'm going to get started. There's so many things I'm looking forward to speaking about, but before diving in, I wanted to provide our listeners with a brief introduction from your bio, which is quite remarkable. So I'm not sure I can cover everything, and I'll cherry pick a few highlights and then invite you to add anything I miss and provide context to our listeners about why you're such a passionate advocate for this topic, if that sounds okay to you.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Dr. John McKeon is principal at the iAIR Institute, a medical entrepreneur, and currently the CEO of Allergy Standards Limited, which we'll refer to by its acronym ASL. As a serial entrepreneur, John is involved in a number of successful healthcare-related ventures, and in addition to his entrepreneurial and business activities, maintains an interest in university research and knowledge exchange practices. John is an adjunct professor in the Center for Practice and Healthcare Innovation, entrepreneur in residence in the Faculty of Health Sciences, guest lecturer at Trinity College Business School, and a member of the Knowledge Transfer and Innovation Committee, Trinity College Dublin. As an expert in healthcare entrepreneurship, John works with healthcare entrepreneurs, professional managers, and business owners in life sciences, biotechnology, and medical device sectors to develop strategies to build profitable businesses, clarify their business models for scalable growth, and improve lives. How did I do, John? Does that cover a lot of it?
It does. You hear a lot these days about inflation being a problem, but that kind of inflation of my ego, I think, is a good idea. No, you covered everything really, and I suppose my mission really is to improve lives. I trained as a medical doctor, but my medical entrepreneurship has really been about impact and improving people's lives, and I think that's such a core issue these days around how the built environment impacts on our health and wellness. So, no, I think you covered everything there, more than everything. Appreciate that introduction.
Well, fantastic. And, I thought we could really get into how your background has played into your professional journey. So maybe I'll give you the opportunity before we really get into some questions, John, to share about that and how ASL came about and again how your background led you to this career.
Sure. Well, it all started a very busy night shift in the emergency room when I was working as a emergency room doctor. We call it accident and emergency in Europe. And seeing a lot of patients, children with asthma and allergies and flare-ups of their asthma and allergies. And often the parents would bring them to the emergency room out of hours. And they would ask me, look, doctor, is there something we can do to stay well rather than you treating us when we become sick? And parents have to take a day off work and all the knock-on effects when one becomes unwell and need to rush into hospital. And I've seen over the years, the trend of medicine has gone very much that way anyway. We're very much proactive about staying well. Medicine is very much a two-way street. It's no longer just command and control by your doctor and that asymmetry of information that often existed in medicine, that you would have to go to a particular building, all the information was held on one side. It's been very much democratized by not only the internet, but we've seen the rise of things like mindfulness and more exercise. When the gyms were closed of COVID, people wanted to get back to them for mental health issues, not just to build big muscles or whatever it may be. So everybody's very switched on about the environment, particularly the built environment and how it impacts our wellness, but also about being proactive, where it's wearable devices, smartphones, and even the World Health Organization and various organizations, the United Nations definitions of health and so forth, isn't just the absence of disease. There's so many more things these days. It's psychological health, emotional health, spiritual health. We've seen how that's all that very broad definition of health and well-being. But when you come to asthma and allergy and you're talking about being proactive and taking back control, you start to talk about the indoor environment because we spend up to 90% of our time indoors. If you think about just your own day to day, do an audit, outside, inside audit of where you've been, whether it's transport or at work or at home at work, etc. We're indoors and it's the built environment. There is a lot of focus on outdoor issues in Europe now. We've got terrible forest fires as well, recently in Canada a few months ago. But indoor air is where you need to tackle for asthma and allergy. And you start to talk about allergens and things that build up our indoor environment. And I would give patients and the mums, normally the parents, it was normally the mums, advice about optimizing your indoor environment. And I talk about various products that we surround ourselves in our homes, whether it's furnace filters, electrical appliances that clean floors and clean the air, or the textile products, pillows, bedding, cleaning products, and all the stuff we have in our home. And people would write down lots and lots of information, but as we always say, we're drowning in information and we can go to Google and get, but we're starving for wisdom and insights and
Right.
actionable insights. So I would say to the parents, look, if you're buying this pillow, do this cleaning product, do this, make sure it does do that. It doesn't contain this, it does do that. And they get overwhelmed very quickly. And one of the mums said to me, he said, Doc, like, I get what you're talking about. When I try to buy something, I can't problem solve at the point of purchase. And wouldn't it be great if somebody could test all these products
Mm,
and identify them as being helpful or won't exacerbate and can optimize the indoor environment? So that's what
right.
Allergy Standards is. We test consumer products. So we started a journey with products, children's toys. Toys R Us, actually, when Disney were one of our very first clients.
Okay.
Then we looked at all things in a home, and then you actually start to look at indoor environments, and then we've looked at verifying services and buildings and architects. So we can talk lots about that, but it started very much in products, and then it's gone all the way to verifying and testing and training and educating about the indoor environment as a whole.
Fantastic, and I fully appreciate the holistic approach to wellness, and certainly
Mm,
your unique background in medicine. I think helping to set the stage for the important work that you're doing now. I did
sure.
want to ask a bit about for allergy standards. I understand that there are three business units or pillars, as you refer to them. Can you define those and share how they work together as an ecosystem within your organization, and anything you'd like us to know about that?
Sure, sure. Well, as I said, our journey started with products. And then if you think of all the products in a home or in an office or in a school, you start then to talk about environments. And then when you talk about if we can make the environments optimized for health, if people live or work or go to school in those environments, are they better? And can you actually look at outcomes, health, economic outcomes? So that was kind of our curve, products, environments, people. But also our three pillars within the company is we started in certification and standards, and even the standards is about education. We're knowledge brokers. It's always been that transfer of knowledge. It's been that patient empowerment, people being proactive. So it was a natural fit then that we would develop an academy and a training academy, and we have training programs for, if you think of the built environment, you've got people who kind of blueprint or design the built environment, architects, construction professionals who build it, interior design and aesthetic design people who do the procurement and specify what goes in. And then you have the building owners and operators, as well as the facilities management people. So we
Right.
felt if we were going to do products, we then need to educate people and educate processes. So we're like products, people, and processes. So the academy we started, and it's the Indoor Air Innovation and Research Institute that has the academy, and that's teaching architects and design professionals accredited by the American Industry of Architects. We have a program accredited by the National Association of Home Builders. We have a program where we work with groups in NeoCon and Design Days, and then we work with groups with regards to BOMA Building Owners and Managers Association, and then ISSA, the International Facilities Association. So that's the academy. And then, as I mentioned, if we're doing research now about innovating and designing better products and training, and then you're doing research outcomes, you need an institute. So we have the Indoor Air Innovation Research, which is a 501c in Washington, D.C. So it's our standards body, our academy, and then our research institute.
Great. Wow. It's truly like a full ecosystem that you've developed around the topic. Maybe just to keep it orderly for you to ask some questions and understand each of those different components, I was hoping we could start with sort of the origin story around the asthma and allergy friendly certification and verification program, and why it's so important to look for that mark on products. I know you mentioned you shared some of that background as a medical physician, but can you share kind of in the early days of bringing that to fruition, why that was so important and how companies responded to that and why they're seeing that as an important thing for the market, for consumers, for people who are using those products?
Sure, absolutely. Well, the first thing to say is it was a patient-led innovation, and I really believe that healthcare innovation is going to be from not the doctors alone. If you look at all the breakthroughs recently, they're a break with traditional thinking. And if you look at, say, Stripe, the payment company, they weren't a bank. Skype originally, the voice over internet, they weren't a telephone company. Uber doesn't have taxis, and Airbnb doesn't have hotels. So the real industry breakthroughs are often come from the outside. And I think we are moving from a doctor knows best to a patient knows best. Or certainly a two-way street. And there was a lot of evidence now has been published around COVID that digital medicine, that two-way street, that patient interviews, what the medics call bi-directional feedback loops, that was all enabled through the digital innovations of COVID, is now having a big impact. So I think the idea that the program was a patient-led, a patient idea is really interesting, because there was a requirement for a lighthouse in the fog to cut through a lot of the noise. You had various groups. You had the physicians and the National Institute of Health, the National Heart, Lung and Blood Institute, the various GP guidelines advising patients about allergen avoidance techniques. You had the Federal Trade Commission, who were loosely policing this word hypoallergenic. You had the EPA, the FDA, the Consumer Product Safety Commission. There was examples, the FTC making product fines and product recalls of people that were making unsubstantiated allergen-based claims. So it was the perfect storm of doctors saying one thing, patients really wanting to be proactive, and the various organizations. And you can still to this day go to the EPA and the FDA websites, and they highlight the fact the word hypoallergenic is meaningless. It's a made-up term. So we felt it was really important to have this beacon, this lighthouse in the fog, to cut through the noise and join up the dots. And the way we describe the certification program is, if you think of it, when the matrix of two axes, you've got doesn't resonate with consumers, resonates with consumers on one axis. Bad science and good science on the other axis. There was a lot of products that say resonate with the consumer, like hypoallergenic, but there's very little science related to it. And then we saw ones that were very good certifications, very scientifically valid, strong on science, but they just didn't really resonate with consumers. So one of the things that we do in our certification program is we always partner with a national patient advocacy group. And in the US, that's the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America. They're the trusted voice of the advocates of people with asthma and allergy. And they recognize that we're the only program that they recognized because of the science. So our certification program is a really synergistic two pillars of patient advocacy and the voice of patient, and then our science. And that puts us up in that top right-hand quadrant, which is resonates with consumers and underpinned by good science.
Makes great sense, and it sounds like something that has been needed for a long time. Speaking to allergies specifically, just prior to are connecting, I was doing a little bit of research and looking at the CDC website and noted, and some of these numbers may be a bit different. You may have different insights, but about 1/4 of adults and 1 in 5 children in the U.S. suffering from seasonal allergies was the number that I noted. And interestingly, most people, I would presume, think of allergies as an outside thing, something that maybe you're exposed to because of pollen or some sort of allergen outside. But as we know, indoor air quality and allergens do play together. In your role, and just as you've seen the certification process going to market, can you share a bit about indoor allergens versus outdoor allergens, or how aware the public is about the fact that while you're indoors, you're actually exposed to allergens and poor air quality?
Sure. Well, the first thing is that they're connected. Air all comes from the planet. So whether you're indoor or outdoor, it was originally outdoor at some stage. And there's some really interesting discussions we can touch upon maybe later on about the connection between climate change and asthma and allergies. We're certainly seeing longer outdoor allergy seasons, more pollen blooming earlier, different times of the year. There's more moisture in some areas, adverse weather events like forest fires. So outdoor air pollution and certainly climate change is impacting. And where does our indoor air come from? We need to bring it from outdoors. And in some climates, you just can't open windows, and you may need to heat air or you may need to cool air. And there's a big connection between not only the drive for being planet friendly and being good for our planet, but are our drives people friendly, and how that sustainability and healthy people, healthy planet, healthy people living on a healthy planet. So there's some really interesting conversations going to be had in the future around that. But indoor air, as I said, we spend most of our time indoors, and we spend a lot of that in our bedrooms as well, where there can be buildup of bioburden. And that's different in different parts of America. It's different in different parts of the world. In urban areas, cockroach allergen can often be the most common indoor allergen. Dust mite allergen traditionally in Europe and more moist areas of America, although there's different species of dust mites, which people didn't realize. They originally came from birds' nests. That's where dust mites came from way back when. And then there's other things we can bring in, pollen on our clothes from outdoors and our shoes. There's in underserved communities, a big issue we see is various pest remediation and things like that. And we've done some really interesting interventional studies of going into homes in underserved areas and just doing pest remediation, removing mold and changing bed linens, and have extraordinary life-changing outcomes on people, getting them off complex medication, obesity issues, missing school, missing sports, and some fascinating work in our Innovation Research Institute we're doing on that. Mold is another one. I mean, you can't see moisture, but moisture is really an indoor air pollution, and it builds up, and you get steam, and then it condenses, and there's issues with energy efficient buildings where the dew point is now, moisture balancing, and then you obviously get mold. And again, we're talking about allergens. We haven't even really spoken about infectious agents. We're not talking about Legionella and Stachybotrys and things which are infections. Were non-infectious indoor air pollutants, which are allergens, which cause sickness through an allergic and inflammatory response, not through an infection. If you get into sick buildings and infection, that's a whole new area. So yeah, I think that this idea of people refocusing on indoor air, and this idea that the stresses, internal building stresses like dust, like allergens, like moisture, and we've seen insurance premiums being impacted on outdoor building stresses, hurricanes, and you can put a buttress or reinforcement in your roof, which will cost you a certain amount of money, but you'll get a payback in that in a year or so on your insurance premiums coming down. And I'd like to see that conversation move into internal building stresses, and can we get insurance premium coming down on people's health because they live in healthier buildings?
Absolutely, and I think we'll likely get to that when we do talk about the iAIR Institute. I had some questions specifically for you about the work that you're doing there. But that's very interesting and insightful about, again, the importance of how all these things work together, and education as well. I think the fact that a lot of consumers maybe are not as educated as you may expect, even those with allergies, I would imagine. I'm reminded of that because recently I had a conversation with a colleague, and we were talking about VOCs, and he was not familiar with the terminology, and talking about it in terms that were a little more recognizable. I said, well, if you have a mattress, that new mattress smell, or maybe a new carpet installed, or there's something called off-gassing, and that was a surprise to him in learning about this topic. So beyond allergens, can you speak a bit to things like VOCs or other pollutants or things that contribute to poor indoor air quality, and if that's something that you're also looking at and addressing through allergy standards?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. People often, when they think about allergy and indoors, they think pollen and outdoor allergens, and maybe indoor allergens like dust mite and so forth, but they don't realize that there are other pollutants or things that cause adverse health impact in the indoor environment. Some of them we bring in because it's either in, as you mentioned, kind of carpets or outgas or furniture, MDF furniture, um, or it's way we behave in our home. It can come from cleaning products, it can come from cooking,
Right.
they can come from artificial candles and other fragrances and things we use. So it's how we design and construct the buildings, but then how we live in them on a daily basis, our behaviors in the building. And this idea that indoor air pollution or inside the building, there's kind of comfort physiology of being in a building, and that's talking about, say, lighting, noise, airflow, temperature, humidity. There's all those things that you get if we're in a cold room, cold extremities, dry eyes if the air's too dry. And that's kind of in all the area of comfort physiology. And people are looking a lot at that, particularly in the work environment. Um, Over 80% of people now are what you describe knowledge workers. We're not in Victorian factories pulling levers and doing things like that. We're at our desks and supposed to be knowledge workers and creating. So comfort physiology and being well, big focus on biophilic design, availability for natural daylight, walking to work, cycling to work. The whole idea of being healthy in a building has got so broad now. But if we talk about indoor air pollution, you're right. We kind of bucket into kind of particulates, nuisance dust, ultrafine particles, PM2, PM2.5. So they're kind of particles. There is gases, which you can, nitrous oxide, sulfur oxide, and your VOCs, volatile organic compounds, semi-volatile organic compounds, and phthalates, things like that. But then you have formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, and they come from the products. And then you have the aerobiology or aeroallergens you're talking about, which are kind of pollens and dust mite and cockroach and mouse allergens. So we kind of put them into those kind of three areas: your particles, your gases, and then your biologicals, your protein based, your allergens. And if you have a strategy to remove those, you're doing well. And we kind of bucket the strategy again into three areas. But first of all is source control. And people kind of forget that there's a trifecta in the building around material science, energy management, and then airflow. And if you actually move any of those pieces, you're going to have a knock-on effect of something else. The last energy crisis, the EPA's own building, they sealed it all up, tightened it up, build tight, ventilate right, that everything tightened for energy efficiency. But then the material science, i.e., the chemistry of the products that they constructed the building out of, or wall paint, floor coverings, furniture, that now became a big issue because they tightened the building and energy flow had gone down. So rather than having material science, you got to look at integrated building science. So we talk about controlling its sources. Then you may not be able to do that completely all the time. So then you need to look at ventilation as being the next thing. Same again with COVID. First one, source control, wear a mask, then ventilate. And then the very last thing was filter, if you can. But again, you have to have this integrated building approach. Filtration, yes, plays a role. Ventilation, of course, plays a role. but they're not magic bullets if we're not thinking about controlling its source where possible. And then you start to get into looking at your ventilation strategy, your filtration strategy, but it's very much an integrated approach.
Yeah, I appreciate your mentioning that. It's sort of like a symphony of moving parts. You can treat one aspect in the building, but of course, it is a full ecosystem. And so, ventilation used to be a great idea, but with the wildfire smoke, and of course, outside air isn't always pure air or clean air. And so very much important that that science is moving forward so you can have comfort, energy efficiency, and protection as we continue to make buildings tighter and arguably better. We need to certainly keep that top of mind. John, I'd like to, with that in mind, sort of switch gears to the second pillar at Allergy Standards of the iAIR Academy. Clearly, you have a lot of connectivity in the education and academic world, as well as the business world and the medical world. So perhaps you can share about the Academy and introduce that to our listeners.
Yeah, and again, I've always been in patient empowerment, patient education, and that's knowledge transfer, and it's transfer of knowledge. You were talking earlier about the numbers of asthma and allergy, and just the hunger for information. You can see it to Google Trends. You can go to Google Trends or Google Insights, and you can actually get the search terms people are searching in areas in America and the days they search it. And you'll see in Google Trends and Google Insights spikes of people Googling asthma and allergy and pollen and indoor air pollution and
Right.
forest fires. And so people are there is a big hunger for information. And as I said earlier, we are drowning in information, but it's the insights, and so now people can go to ChatGPT now. You can get information is not the problem. It's been completely democratized. It's that wisdom and that insight of how to, which I think, but by the way, I think it's a good thing. I don't think people should be holding all the information, but now it's how do you empower people to turn that into actionable insights? And that's where the
Right.
Academy came from. I did a webinar, a lunch and learn actually, to a group of construction professionals, and their own industry afterwards, the Energy Efficiency Building Alliance, contacted me and said after the webinar, people are really confused about this. There's legislation about electrification in cooking stoves, and that's become a politicized issue. Is it a sustainability issue, or is it really a health and indoor air quality issue? And I don't think we don't have time to go there. But people are confused, and they're looking for wisdom, and they have reached out to us and said, can we get accredited programs? So some of our programs are accredited by the American Institute of Architects. Some of our lectures we've done have got CEU credits from the American Institute of Interior Design, some for the National Association of Home Builders, the Building Owners and Managers Alliance, and so on and so forth. So just two things I'd like to get across about the Academy. One is it's answering a need, a real hunger to cut through all the noise and confusion around what is healthy buildings. People say about, it's great the building can breathe. Buildings can't breathe. What that means is you've got leaky air somewhere that is naturally ventilating the building, which can be a good thing. It's how the Victorians built their homes, but you just don't know where it is. So we really tried to boil down the complexity of this whole area, but then also get accredited by the professional organizations. I mean, I spoke at the the International Builder Show 1 year. I gave a keynote at it. Then I flew across the country and I spoke at a big medical event. And at the construction professional event, there was a whole day and a learning track about healthy buildings, sensor technology, connected technologies, healthy homes, smart homes. And then I flew across, and the same thing in the medical, keeping people, elderly people out of hospital. How do we stay healthy at home? Sensor technology, smart technology, your Amazon or your smart speaker connected to symptoms, diarization. But there was no doctors at the builder show, and there was no construction professionals at the doctor show, talking about the exact same thing. And what we're trying to do through the Academy is bring architects, doctors, patient advocacy groups, design construction professionals all together around this. It's not political. Everybody can agree about healthy people, healthy schools, healthy homes. And really that's one of the visions of the Academy.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and I love this cross-pollination of expertise that creates. One more question on that, John, is there an accreditation? So it sounds like there are accredited programs that you can actually take and apply to other programs. Is there an Allergy Standards specific, an iAIR Academy specific degree or program that you can actually become accredited in?
Yeah, we're looking at doing full training programs, building auditors, healthy home, rather than give it an energy audit, healthy home building. We're working with some big home builders in the US for construction professionals to do that, as well as facility managers. So what we'll do, Bruce, is I'll put some links in the show notes when the podcast goes out. It's iAIR, so it's Indoor Air Innovation and Research. So it's iAIR.academy and iAIR.institute on the web. And we've actually put together some shows for your listeners, and we'll put a coupon code in. There's discount and bypass paywalls. So we'll put all that in the show notes if your listeners would like any more information on it.
Great. Well, thank you, and I'm sure well appreciated. And so there's so much to talk about. I'm concerned about the time. I'm going to actually shift to the third pillar about the iAIR Institute. And after going through the certification program and understanding the purpose of the iAIR Academy, can you share a bit about the iAIR Institute and the purpose of that third pillar?
Yeah, it was a natural extension of, as I said, starting our journey in products and then moving into environments and doing research, either with product innovators who are making products or products that didn't fit into a traditional category. They would ask us to explore new innovative areas. Then, as we developed the academy and we worked more with the American Cleaning Institute, we're on one of their labeling leadership subcommittees. We're on the Healthy Homes subcommittee of the International Builders Group and the National Association of Home Builders. And that bridging effect we spoke earlier, that large companies may have government relations, but if you speak to one of our blue chip clients, their government relations person is dealing with tariffs on steel and employment laws in different parts of the states and lots of different reasons. But they're all very interested in healthy buildings, and we all believe that is the future, connected, smart buildings. I believe that anything in a building or the built environment that can be measured will have a sensor. Every sensor will be connected, and every sensor will be smart and integrated. And there's different voices at that table around design professionals, construction professionals, the users of the buildings, the owner of the building, the person who rents the building, the capital funds who are looking for ESG metrics. What are we doing? Everybody thinks E is energy, and it's really carbon and carbon footprint, but it's environment. Is it the indoor environment or the outdoor environment? You have ESG, and you've got DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. You have this alphabet soup. You've got the United Nations SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. There's all this kind of alphabet soup in all these areas. Health and wellness doesn't actually, it's in all of those, but it doesn't appear in any of them. So we really felt there needed to be an environment, non-partisan. So we're setting up our Healthy Buildings Caucus in Congress, non-partisan, lots of space at the table for people to come, not vested interest, but really to have an open conversation around healthy buildings of the future. And that's why we set up the 501c in DC. About that. That is the Indoor Air Innovation and Research Institute. It's not for profit. It's a platform for patient advocacy groups. So we've had conversations with the Patient Centered Outcome Research Institute, PCORI, number of those groups. But really, we were surprised there isn't a platform for a conversation on healthy buildings to take place in that area. So that's why we set up the Research Institute.
Very interesting. I know that you recently traveled through the U.S., and I understand that you're working on a number of interesting projects in D.C. through iAIR Institute. Can you expand on any of them and how you see, say, regulations or legislation playing an important part in IAQ in the future?
Yeah, I think we've had a number of meetings on the Hill, of both Democrat and Republican. We're very keen for this to be nonpartisan right from the outset, and we've seen in the past, people have gone down, say, indoor air quality issues or ESG or SDG, and sometimes it's really a climate agenda masquerading as a healthy building agenda. We've seen a lot of politicization of the electrification issues and cooking stoves and all that area. So we really want to try and stay out of that and bring people back to a unifying core, which is health and wellness, whether it's our kids being healthy, getting people out of over reliance on medication, because it's really a home issue, and we can go in. We know the data that the USA healthcare budget is going up and up. It's not sustainable. There's some amazing statistics between um, obesity and other societal challenges that it's becoming a security issue because you can't recruit people. I think something like 3 out of 4 adults aren't eligible to go into the military due to some kind of chronic illness or other societal issue. Um, so it's a really big one, and everybody can get around about health and wellness. And if there are things we can do, not being a nanny state and not being some other kind of political angle on it, but if we can really go in and make people well by putting control back into the hands and educating them and being a productive, healthy American in the US. That was really our mission in DC, really. And we found a lot of people are quite happy to rally around that and quite a unifying issue.
Extremely important work, and thank you, John. I feel like we're just scratching the surface. I know we've actually gone over what we typically would in time. So I do certainly hope to continue the conversation offline with you. And I wanted to thank you for not only your time today, but the important work you're doing to further awareness, education, and initiatives around indoor air quality. And thank you very much for joining
Sure.
the show.
No, absolutely, Bruce. I appreciate it. You're obviously a good interviewer. I enjoyed the conversation myself. And again, the iAIR Institute, we'll put that in the show notes as well. If anybody's interested in finding out more, we're working with Bobby Cunningham from the Vogel Group. Their office in Washington, D.C. I'll put Bobby's details in there. Very well connected on the Hill and so forth. So we'll do a special coupon. We put a program together for your listeners on the Academy. Anybody interested in learning more about the Institute, and of course the certification program, we'll put all those links in the show notes as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, John. And again, it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you found today interesting, and I don't know how you could not have, please do share this episode with others who you think would enjoy it. And until next time, I am your host, Bruce Larange, thanking you for joining the Air Exchange and wishing everyone happy and healthy breathing. Thank you.